Hey guys, tonight we slip through the quiet shadows of an ancient world, a place where silence speaks louder than indulgence, and even a simple turnip stew carries the weight of scripture. You're standing at the edge of a Roman-era monastery, fog licking the hem of your robe, the heavy wooden gates creaking open just enough for you to step through. Stone walls rise like sleeping giants around you, holding centuries of whispered prayers, slow-cooked lentils, and the echo of sandals brushing over cold flagstones. The scent hits you first, earthy barley, fin d'encens, and a whiff of something, herbaceous and slightly burned. That's probably Brother Tullius again, scorching the chickpeas. The gate thuds shut behind you, and it's official, you're in. And no, you probably won't survive this without craving bread for the next 3 weeks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow a narrow gravel path, past rows of trimmed olive trees, their silvery leaves catching what little moonlight filters through. A cloaked figure nods at you. He says nothing's speech is rationed here, like oil during a bad harvest. You're already late for morning prep, and nobody wants to be late on Barley Day. The cloister itself is a stone rectangle, open in the middle to a patch of meticulously groomed soil parsley, mint, leeks. 4 corridors stretch outward from the central garden, like arms in silent prayer. Each leads to a different kind of devotion prayer. Study, rest, and the kitchen. You're led to a small room just off the kitchen, bare stone, one narrow window, and a stack of folded robes that still smell faintly of ash and rosemary. This is your spot now. The walls are thin enough for you to hear the scrape of a ladle, the whoosh of a breath, just before the prayer before meals. Historians still argue whether the early monasteries modeled their meal rituals more on military mess halls or Roman domestic customs. Either way, once you're in the rhythm, it's more choreography than cooking. You rise before light, to you eat in silence, and every bite is a lesson in humility and maybe indigestion. Tonight, you won't sleep on a full stomach. That's by design, but you will sleep a little wiser about how these early monks balanced survival with sanctity, one spoonful of chickpea mash at a time. The first light doesn't so much. Arrivals seep in like broth through cloth. A single, low bell tolls through the misty dawn, and you jolt upright, disoriented and chilled. The sound isn't loud, but it carries weight. Like the bell knows something you don't. You wrap yourself in a scratchy wool tunic and step into the cloister. Monks shuffle past like ghosts in sandals, some still half asleep, others lips already moving in silent psalms. Breakfast isn't a leisurely affair here, it's a spiritual checkpoint. You follow them through the east corridor, your stomach rumbling quietly in protest. Inside the refectory, the room is long, lined with wooden benches and a single table running its full length. Light spills through narrow windows, catching the rising steam of porridge. Again, you're handed a clay bowl filled with a pale mash of barley and maybe a hint of dried fig if you're lucky. It smells faintly nutty and a little like disappointment. A monk stands at the far end, reading softly from a scroll while the rest sit in silence. No chewing loudly, no eye contact. This is not Denny's. There's something humbling about eating in absolute silence with 24 other souls. Every sound, every scrape of bowl against wood, is a reminder that eating here is not about pleasure, but presence. You don't eat to indulge. You eat to continue. Still, the breakfast ritual has its charm. The bowls are warmed, the wooden spoons smoothed by use, and there's a peculiar unity in the shared simplicity. Even the abbot eats the same porridge. At the same pace, the hierarchy fades a little over grains and figs. One French belief, rarely mentioned in modern textbooks, suggests that monks developed this morning porridge not just for economy, but for digestion. They believed starting the day with easily digestible barley would clear the mind for prayer. Not scientifically sound, maybe, but poetic in its own weird way. Historians still argue whether these monastic meals were designed more for health or holiness. But either way, your stomach doesn't care. It just wants more figs. You shuffle into the kitchen after the meal, where the real magic, or maybe the real monotony, happens. The room is warm and dimly lit. A single slit of sunlight, falling on a pile of spelt flour sacks stacked like holy relics. A monk is grinding barley by hand, each slow rotation echoing through the stone room like a sleepy heartbeat. This is where you learn the pecking order of monastic grains. Barley's the workhorse, cheap, hearty, and blessedly hard to ruin. Spelt comes next, considered slightly more refined. Ideal for the rare occasions you need to impress a bishop. Wheat, that's luxury tier. And good luck seeing it more than twice a year, unless you're the abbot. Today's lesson: barley cakes. You roll dough under Brother Severus's watchful eye, flattening it with the heel of your palm. No yeast here, too indulgent. Just barley flour, a splash of oil, a pinch of salt, and a prayer that it bakes evenly. The oven, a dome of sun-bleached clay, glows like an ember. You slide the cakes in on a plank, sweating from the heat, but proud of your lopsided handiwork. In the corner, a jug of lentil mash bubbles quietly. It smells educational. What's surprising is how creative the monks get within their tight restrictions. No meat, rarely dairy, only modest oils. But with grains like emmer and einkorn, plus dried fruits, pulses, and nuts, they still manage a kind of holy comfort food. Think oat cakes with wild honey, or lentil stew with garlic and vinegar. It's austery, but somehow satisfying, like a minimalist's version of Grandma's kitchen. One quirky discovery: archaeologists once found carbonized barley biscuits buried beneath a monastery pantry, probably left behind in a forgotten fast. Hard as rocks, but preserved like edible scrolls. Historians still argue whether grain preservation was an accident or a proto-supply chain strategy. Either way, those biscuits could probably survive the apocalypse. Let's talk protein, because if you're expecting steak, you're in for a cosmic letdown. Inside this stone fortress of quiet piety, meat is more than off the table. It's practically a sin with a side of judgment. Instead, your protein salvation comes in humbler forms. Legumes are the superstars here: lentils, chickpeas, and broad beans in endless permutations. Today, you're prepping a thick stew of fava beans with garlic and mint. It bubbles in a blackened pot, slow cooked until the beans split like tiny revelations. Fish makes a guest appearance now and then, especially salted or smoked. Easier to preserve and less decadent. And cheese, that's a theological gray zone. Some monasteries ban it, others treat it like edible gold. Goat cheese is the usual suspect: sharp, dry, and crumbling into everything from stews to flatbreads. You help churn curdled goat milk into something that vaguely resembles cheese. Your arm aches, your patience frays. But when it sets, oh, it's a miracle with texture. Still, you notice something deeper. The monks aren't just skipping meat, they're avoiding indulgence itself. Anything too rich, too flavorful, too joyous feels risky. Gluttony is a gateway sin here. Overeat, and you might just reincarnate as a Roman senator. One fringe theory suggests monks believe legumes calmed carnal urges. True or not, you definitely won't feel sexy after your third bowl of lentil paste. Historians still argue whether the monastic rejection of meat was purely theological or partly economic. Less cost, fewer cravings, less temptation. Either way, your dinner tonight is beige, bland, and virtuous. You quickly learn that the rule of moderation isn't just a suggestion. It's carved into the stone of daily life here. Every meal, every morsel, every sip is measured, weighed, and, frankly, sometimes mourned. You try to pace yourself, but these monks have perfected portion control to near saintly levels. One ladle of stew, a single barley cake, a tiny cup of water or diluted wine, no seconds, no snacks, no, just one more bite. This discipline extends beyond the table. The monks believe that appetite is a door to temptation. Feed it too well, and you invite gluttony, lust, or laziness. So, the kitchen becomes a zone of self-denial, wrapped in the faint aroma of herbs and burnt bread. You watch Brother Antonius deliberately scrape his bowl clean, but not so clean as to seem eager. It's an art form, really a dance between gratitude and restraint. One particularly strict monastery even weighed the food served on communal plates, using primitive scales to ensure fairness and modesty. The irony is delicious. The very act of measuring food down to the gram feels extravagant in its own way. You wonder if there's a secret rebellion brewing in the kitchen. A covert stash of figs saved for midnight raids. A quirky fact: some monks would chew food slowly, almost meditatively, counting each chew up to 30 times before swallowing. This wasn't just patience, but a ritual to tame, desire, and savor simplicity. Historians still argue whether such extreme moderation was a reflection of spiritual purity or simply a practical response to scarce resources. Your stomach, however, I just knows it's a test of willpower, and you're losing. You find yourself creeping into the kitchen scullery, a place shrouded in half-darkness and whispered secrets. The room is chilly and smells of wet stone, old herbs, and the faint tang of vinegar. Here, silence rules every chop, every splash. Every scrape is muted like a sacred hush. The scullery is where preparation meets penance. You watch a monk peel turnips with reverent precision. The knife moves slowly, almost tenderly, each peel falling like a soft whisper onto the wooden table. There's a strange rhythm here, a meditative choreography. No casual chatter, no laughter, only the sound of peeling, chopping, and the occasional soft sigh. The flickering candlelight casts long shadows, turning simple kitchen implements into statues of humility. You notice the absence of any modern convenience, no bells to ring, no whistles to blow, just human hands working in deliberate harmony. A quirky tidbit: some monasteries forbade the use of sharp knives, during fasting days. Believing the pain of dull cutting would remind monks of their spiritual hunger. Imagine grumbling through your turnip stew with a blunt blade that feels like it's chewing back. Historians still argue whether such austere kitchen rules were symbolic gestures or practical safety measures. Regardless, the atmosphere here makes you feel like you're part of a centuries-old secret society, one where even the simplest vegetable becomes a relic. You pause and inhale deeply, the scent of garlic, thyme, and faint smoke wraps around you like a comforting, if slightly unsettling, blanket. Cooking here is less about nourishment and more about ritual, a slow, quiet offering to something greater than hunger. At the heart of the kitchen stands the sacred stove, an unassuming clay dome glowing with a steady warmth that seems to breathe life into every dish. You slide your barley cakes onto a wooden paddle and press them against the hot surface, feeling the heat seep through the thin dough like an old, reassuring friend. This stove is no ordinary appliance. It's the soul of monastic cooking, fueled by charcoal or carefully gathered wood. It maintains a slow, consistent heat for hours. You learn that patience is baked right into the food here. Nothing rushed, nothing flashy. The slow-cooked lentils, the toasted grains, the simmered herbs, all rely on this steady pulse. Nearby, a copper pot simmers quietly, its surface shimmering with soft bubbles. The monks treat their cookware like sacred vessels, polished but worn, each with a story etched into its dents and discolorations. Interestingly, the clay ovens were often communal property, maintained by a rotation of brothers who took pride in their fire-tending skills. One quirky historical note is that some monasteries used bellows shaped like animal skins, sometimes decorated with intricate carvings, blending utility with art in their humble kitchen. Historians still argue whether these clay stoves originated from Roman domestic kitchens or were inspired by earlier pagan rituals involving fire. Either way, their simplicity and endurance speak to a timeless respect for elemental cooking. You watch the barley cakes bubble and brown slowly, their scent promising a humble satisfaction. The oven's warmth seeps into your bones, and for a moment, the austerity of the monastery feels less like deprivation and more like a quiet sanctuary. You dip your fingers into a simple clay cup, unsure whether you're braving water or wine. In this monastery, hydration isn't straightforward. It's a moral puzzle with a splash of theology. Water is pure, sure, but considered cold and potentially disruptive to digestion, while wine is warm and spiritually rich, yet sinfully intoxicating if overdone. The monks navigate this tricky balance with practiced caution. Most days, they drink water, diluted with a hint of vinegar, something called posca in the Roman world, both refreshing and a little tangy. Wine, when allowed, is watered down to the point it's barely noticeable, a gentle comfort rather than a celebration. You notice how each sip is deliberate, measured. It's not about quenching thirst so much as honoring the body as a temple, not a tavern. The wine vessels are modest, earthenware cups with no flourish, a far cry from the elaborate goblets of Roman banquets. Here's a quirky fact. Some monasteries believed that drinking too much water could encourage laziness or even spiritual fogginess. The idea was that wine, diluted or not, helped keep the mind alert and prayerful. It's a surprising cocktail of practicality and piety. Historians still argue whether this drinking practice was rooted more in health concerns or theological symbolism, but you can't help but wonder if the monks ever longed for a proper glass of red You take a small sip of your watered-down wine, and it tastes faintly of regret and vinegar. You enter the refectory again, this time focusing on the communal meal's strict choreography. Dining here is a ritual, no casual chatting, no passing plates, no laughter ringing through the hall. You eat in rows, each monk sitting shoulder to shoulder, eyes lowered, hands folded before the meal begins. There's a sacred silence that hangs heavy in the air, broken only by the low drone of scripture read aloud by a designated reader. You realize the meal is as much about contemplation and humility as it is about food. Conversation is replaced by internal prayer, and even the act of eating becomes a form of meditation. The food arrives in large wooden bowls, passed quietly down the line. Everyone takes their share. Nothing more, nothing less. You're reminded of a military mess hall. Except here, every bite is a vow of modesty. One curious detail: some monasteries forbade any sound during meals, believing that noise could stir pride or gossip. Others allowed whispered reflections on the scripture being read. This difference sparks an ongoing debate among historians about how strictly silence was enforced. In your seat, you notice how this silence shapes the experience. The taste of the barley stew sharpens. The texture of the bread becomes a focused sensation. Eating isn't entertainment here. It's an exercise in discipline. You chew slowly, feeling the weight of tradition settle around you like a heavy cloak. It's not cozy, but it's profoundly real. Ironically, fasting days sometimes mean fancier food. You might think going without food equals going without flavor. But in this monastery, the opposite can be true, at least in a restrained way. On fast days, monks avoid heavy foods like cheese or meat substitutes, but often prepare a more elaborate vegetable stew or a richly spiced lentil dish. You watch as Brother Cassian carefully seasons a pot of boiled cabbage with vinegar, wild herbs, and just a hint of crushed garlic. The kitchen is quieter on fasting days, but the intensity feels heightened, like the food itself is a form of prayer. The portions remain small, but the textures and flavors get a bit more interesting, something to distract the palate from hunger without breaking the vow of abstinence. A quirky note: some fast day recipes include wild fennel and bitter greens believed to cleanse both body and spirit. You grimace as you taste a particularly sharp concoction. Delicious, maybe not. Effective, absolutely. Historians still argue whether these fast day dishes were designed to prepare the monks for spiritual clarity or simply to endure the physical hardship of limited food. Your tongue leans toward the latter explanation. You realize fasting here isn't just about what you don't eat. It's about transforming the act of eating itself into a humble ritual, where even a plain cabbage can become sacred. You're beginning to notice how much of monastic cooking revolves around the seasons. The monastery garden isn't just decoration. It's a crucial source of fresh ingredients that dictate what lands on your plate. In spring, tender greens like sorrel and dandelion pop up, their bitter tang waking up your taste buds from the winter doldrums. Come summer, there are wild berries and herbs like rosemary and thyme, scents that fill the air with quiet joy. You walk past the garden beds, brushing your hand against the cool leaves of parsley and marjoram. The monks harvest carefully, taking only what's needed and always with gratitude. They see the garden as a living scripture, each plant a verse, teaching patience and respect. Fresh vegetables are rare luxuries here, and you quickly learn to appreciate the humble root carrots, turnips, and parsnips, all stored underground and pulling sweetness from the soil during the cold months. Preserving techniques are rudimentary, but effective drying herbs. Pickling cabbage. Salting olives. One quirky historical tidbit is that some monasteries cultivated herb spirals, small spiral-shaped gardens designed to maximize space and microclimates, a kind of medieval vertical farming that modern gardeners have rediscovered. Historians still argue whether monastic gardening was primarily practical or symbolic. But either way, the cycle of growth and harvest is woven deeply into the monk's rhythm of life. You pluck a sprig of thyme and crush it between your fingers. The aroma is a small, sharp spark of life amid the monotony of grain and legume. It's mid-morning, and the monks have begun a different kind of preparation, fermentation. You watch as Brother Simeon checks on a large ceramic jar filled with a bubbling mix of cabbage and salt. Sauerkraut, or something close to it, is in the making. Fermentation isn't just a practical way to preserve vegetables for the lean months. It's also seen as a metaphor for transformation, a humble process that turns ordinary cabbage into something sharper, more complex, and surprisingly nourishing. You poke the cabbage lightly, noticing the faint, sour smell mingled with the earthy stone walls. It's pungent and a little intimidating, but you remind yourself that monks have been doing this for centuries. Their ancient recipes didn't rely on refrigeration, just patience and the magic of microbes. Interestingly, some monasteries believe that fermented foods helped cleanse the body and soul, aiding digestion and even warding off melancholy. You wonder if that's why they seemed so serious about their cabbage. A quirky fact in one monastery: archaeologists found remnants of wild yeast used to make a type of primitive beer brewed not for indulgence but as a safer alternative to water. Historians still argue whether fermentation was embraced more for its health benefits or its theological symbolism. But you can't deny that the sharp bite of sauerkraut adds a welcome zing to an otherwise bland menu. You take a cautious taste and are surprised by the tangy warmth, a tiny rebellion against the monastery's usual austerity. You move on to the mysterious art of bread baking, which feels like a sacred ritual rather than a simple chore. The monk's bread is coarse and dense, more fuel than comfort food, but it carries an almost holy significance. It's the staff of life, literally and spiritually. You watch Brother Paulus knead a lump of spelt dough, fingers folding, pressing, coaxing life from the flour and water. No yeast means the bread doesn't rise much, but the texture is hearty, full of grainy bits that crunch and surprise. Bread here is baked in the same clay oven that slowly cooks the barley cakes, its heat measured by seasoned hands and careful timing. You realize that each loaf is a prayer, one that requires patience and respect. No shortcuts allowed. Here's a quirky fact: some monasteries kept small fires burning overnight near the ovens to maintain steady heat, a practice believed to keep evil spirits from creeping in through the cracks. Historians still argue whether the flat, unleavened bread was a continuation of Jewish dietary tradition or simply a practical choice given limited resources and religious fasting rules. You break off a piece and chew slowly, tasting the earth and sweat baked into every crumb. It's simple, yes, but in this place, simple is sacred. You start to understand that spices are the ultimate luxury in this world of austerity. The monastery's pantry holds only a handful salt, pepper, maybe a pinch of cumin or coriander, precious treasures imported through ancient trade routes stretching all the way from Asia. These spices are used sparingly, almost like prayer beads, adding subtle warmth or a flicker of exotic flavor to otherwise plain dishes. You imagine the long journey these spices took from the bustling markets of Alexandria or Rome, across deserts and seas, before finally arriving here, sealed in clay jars and guarded carefully. The monk's restraint in using them isn't just about cost, but about cultivating humility. Flavor is a gift, not a right. Interestingly, some monks believed spices had healing properties, making them small apothecaries as much as cooks. They mix spices with herbs in teas, intended to soothe ailments, calm nerves, or even ward off evil spirits. A quirky historical note: black pepper was so valuable, it was sometimes called black gold and used as currency in trade. You can almost picture a monk weighing out peppercorns like precious coins, hesitating before sprinkling them on stew. Historians still argue whether the sparing use of spices was motivated more by spiritual discipline or simple scarcity. But either way, every pinch counts. You close your eyes and inhale the faint scent of cumin, a tiny spark of warmth in the cool, quiet kitchen. The story of monastic meals wouldn't be complete without mentioning the humble legume, beans, lentils, and chickpeas form the backbone of the monk's diet, offering much-needed protein and bulk without luxury or excess. You watch a pot of lentils simmer slowly, the tiny bubbles promising nourishment that's as humble as it is reliable. Legumes have a long history here. They're hardy, easy to store, and packed with energy for long hours of prayer and work. Their earthy flavor becomes a familiar comfort, even if you sometimes wish for something with a bit more punch. You discover that some monks developed clever recipes mixing legumes with herbs and grains to keep meals varied enough to prevent boredom and nutritional enough to sustain serious fasting. A quirky tidbit in some monasteries: beans were soaked overnight and sometimes even sprouted to improve digestion and increase vitality. You picture a secret ritual where monks whisper encouragement to their beans. Historians still argue whether legumes were prized primarily for their practicality or if they held deeper symbolic meaning related to growth and renewal. As you spoon up the thick lentil stew, you feel the simple satisfaction of a meal that's meant to fuel body and soul without distraction. You come across a curious ritual: the blessing of the bread and food before the meal begins. The abbot, or a senior monk, stands at the head of the refectory, raising his hands in solemn prayer. The words are ancient, sometimes whispered in Latin, sometimes sung softly in chants that seem to ripple through the stone walls. This moment transforms the meal from mere survival to a spiritual act. Food is no longer just sustenance, but a sacred gift to be received with humility and gratitude. The monks bow their heads, some crossing themselves, others simply closing their eyes. You notice how this blessing creates a palpable sense of community, binding the brothers together in shared purpose and devotion. It's a reminder that even the simplest meal is wrapped in layers of meaning. A quirky historical note is that in some monasteries, leftover blessed bread was crushed and mixed into water as a healing potion or given to the sick, an early form of holy medicine. Historians still argue whether these blessings were a carryover from Roman religious practices or innovations of Christian monasticism. Either way, the ritual adds a profound dimension to the everyday act of eating. You feel a gentle warmth in your chest, as if this ancient prayer has touched you. Even as a visitor, you realize that even cleanliness around food holds spiritual weight. The monks wash their hands carefully before and after meals, not just for hygiene, but as a symbolic cleansing of sin. The water is cold and brisk, sometimes scented with herbs like rosemary or lavender from the garden, turning the simple act into a sensory ritual. You watch Brother Julian dip a linen towel into a basin and wipe his hands methodically, the fabric rough against his skin. It's a quiet moment of mindfulness before the stillness of the meal resumes. There's no rush here. No haphazard splashing, just deliberate care. Interestingly, Some monasteries even had special washing stations outside the refectory, designed to ensure that every brother purified himself before partaking. These setups often included carved stone basins with symbolic engravings, blending function with faith. A quirky detail is that certain monks believed washing hands in cold water could sharpen the mind and ward off evil spirits lurking in the body's pores. You wonder if they secretly enjoyed the brisk shock of it. Historians still argue whether these washing rituals derive more from ancient Jewish purification customs or early Christian innovation. Either way, the act bridges physical cleanliness and spiritual readiness in a way that feels both practical and profound. You find yourself wanting to mimic the careful washing, even though you know you're far from this monastic world. You notice the monks' simple eating implements, wooden spoons, rough ceramic bowls, and sometimes basic knives. There's nothing ornate here, no silverware or porcelain, just functional tools shaped by necessity and humility. Each utensil is cared for meticulously. You watch a brother polish a wooden spoon with oil, smoothing the grain until it gleams softly in the dim candlelight. These objects are almost extensions of the monks themselves, worn but respected. Curiously, some monasteries forbade the use of forks, considering them unnecessary and even prideful. Eating was meant to be tactile, direct, and honest hands and spoons were enough to humble the eater. A quirky historical tidbit in some places. Monks carved little faces or symbols into their wooden spoons, turning them into personal talismans or reminders of virtues like patience and charity. Historians still argue whether this minimalist approach to utensils was strictly spiritual or partly a practical response to poverty and resource scarcity. Either way, the simplicity invites a closer, more mindful relationship with food. You pick up a spoon, feeling its smooth weight, and marvel at how something so basic can hold so much meaning. You stumble upon the practice of communal cooking, which is less about efficiency and more about brotherhood. The kitchen buzzes quietly as several monks work side by side, each assigned a role. From chopping vegetables, to stirring pots, to tending fires, you sense a rhythm here, a dance that's been perfected over centuries. Everyone moves with purpose, but without haste, communicating with gestures and glances rather than words. The sense of shared responsibility is palpable. Interestingly, some monasteries rotated kitchen duties monthly, ensuring that every monk learned the skills and humility required to prepare food. No one was above the kitchen work. Even the abbot might have wielded a ladle or sharpened a knife. A quirky fact: one monastery kept a tally of kitchen sins, light-heartedly noting mistakes like burnt bread or spilled soup as a way to foster camaraderie and gentle accountability. Historians still argue whether communal cooking developed from Roman household practices or evolved independently within Christian monasticism. Regardless, the kitchen becomes a place where humility and labor meet fellowship. You feel a little warmth watching these quiet workers, their movements blending practicality and devotion. You watch the monks handle their cooking fires with remarkable care, nothing left to chance. No reckless sparks flying. The open hearth is the heart of the kitchen, and its flames demand respect. You notice how the fires are fed slowly, with small twigs and carefully chosen wood, to keep a steady, moderate heat. The monks avoid roaring blazes, preferring a gentle, consistent warmth that simmers food evenly. This slow fire method shapes the food's character. Stews develop deep, mellow flavors over hours, while barley cakes bake slowly to a firm but tender crust. The kitchen smells of wood, smoke, and earth, a comforting aroma that ties the meal to the natural world outside. An interesting note: Some monasteries kept firekeepers, monks specially assigned to monitor and tend the flames around the clock, almost like ancient firefighters with sacred duties. A quirky tidbit in one place. They believed that the way a fire burned could predict the monk's spiritual health. Flickering flames meant distractions. Steady embers meant focus. Historians still argue whether these fire-tending practices evolved from Roman culinary traditions or were innovations of early monastic life. Either way, the fire is clearly a symbol of life and devotion. You inhale the warm smoke and feel oddly soothed, as if the flames themselves whisper ancient prayers. You stumble on the ritual of cleaning up after meals, which is surprisingly methodical and meaningful. The monks don't just wash dishes. They treat this act as a final offering of service and humility. Water is carefully saved and reused when possible. Wastefulness is an offense, both practical and spiritual. You see brothers scrubbing wooden bowls with rough cloths, rinsing spoons in basins of cold water, and stacking everything neatly. The sound of water and cloth brushing against wood is soft and rhythmic, a quiet symphony after the silence of the meal. Interestingly, some monasteries had specific prayers or chants to accompany the cleanup, turning what might seem mundane into a sacred act. It's as if the kitchen itself is sanctified by this final attentive, care. A quirky fact in certain monasteries: monks kept dishwashing logs, recording any damage to kitchenware to maintain accountability and foster responsibility. Historians still argue whether these cleaning rituals have roots in Roman household customs or developed uniquely within Christian monasticism. Whatever the origin, it's clear that tidying up is more than hygiene. It's devotion. You find yourself wanting to linger in the gentle clatter and splash, feeling a strange calm in these small, orderly actions. You notice the monk's practice of eating leftovers, not with disdain, but with reverence. Food is never wasted. Even the smallest crumb is treated like a blessing. Leftovers might be transformed into a soup, mixed with fresh herbs, or simply eaten cold the next day, with the same quiet gratitude as the first meal. This thrifty approach reflects a deep respect for creation, an acknowledgement that every grain has value and every meal is a gift. It's a far cry from modern throwaway culture here. Frugality is woven into spiritual discipline. Interestingly, some monasteries had leftover days, where the kitchen crew would invent creative dishes from whatever remained, turning scarcity into culinary innovation. A quirky tidbit: archaeological evidence shows some monasteries stored stale bread to soften in broth, creating an early version of what we might now call bread pudding, though with much less sugar and a lot more humility. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on leftovers was purely economic or a theological statement about stewardship. Either way, you can't help but admire the resourcefulness. You tuck a bit of leftover barley cake into your mouth, savoring its quiet history of meals past. You notice how salt plays a quiet but crucial role in the monastery kitchen. Far from just seasoning, salt is a preservative, a purifier, and in some ways, a spiritual symbol. It's sprinkled lightly over food to enhance flavor, but also carefully rationed too much is wasteful. Too little dulls the meal and the spirit. The monks source their salt from nearby coastal areas or salt mines, precious commodities that travel long distances and carry a hefty price. The granules are coarse and unrefined, crunching under your teeth and bringing out the earthiness of the bread and legumes. Here's a quirky tidbit. Salt was sometimes considered a form of spiritual salt, thought to ward off decay, both in body and soul. Some monks believed sprinkling salt around the monastery could protect it from evil influences, Historians still argue whether the religious symbolism of salt predates Christianity or was adapted by monastic communities as a continuation of earlier traditions. Either way, salt is more than seasoning. It's a sacred ingredient. You savor a small pinch, feeling its sharp, mineral bite. Wake up your senses amid the monastery's quiet austerity. You find yourself drawn to the quiet sweetness honey brings to the monastery's otherwise austere table. It's a rare and precious treat, golden, sticky, and packed with subtle complexity that contrasts sharply with the humble grains and legumes that dominate most meals. Honey is like a tiny, hidden indulgence, a glimpse of nature's generosity amidst the daily discipline. Monks maintain small apiaries tucked away in sunlit corners of their gardens or courtyards. You watch a beekeeper monk gently lift a frame from a wooden hive, careful not to disturb the buzzing workers. The air is filled with a faint scent of flowers and beeswax, almost electric in its vitality. The hives themselves are simple boxes, painted white or left natural, bearing the marks of years of use and careful tending. The honey harvested is never wasted. It's stirred into thin herbal teas to soothe dry throats after long hours of chanting, drizzled sparingly over barley cakes to add a whisper of sweetness, or mixed with medicinal herbs in small pots used for healing. You can almost imagine the buzz of the bees as an invisible choir supporting the monks' daily routines. Curiously, honey's significance goes beyond taste. In medieval medical texts and monastic writings, honey is praised for its healing properties, used to treat wounds and digestive ailments alike. It's the original antibiotic. The monks believe, a gift from God hidden inside a humble bee's work. In fact, the presence of honey in the monastery diet highlights an intriguing overlap between spiritual and physical care. A quirky detail emerges when you discover that some monasteries held honeybees as symbols of community and diligence qualities they prized in their own monastic lives. The busy bee's tireless work ethic became a metaphor for the monk's ceaseless devotion to prayer and labor. You almost chuckle imagining a monk whispering encouragement to his hive, as if it were a fellow brother. Historians still argue whether the monastic reverence for honey came from older pagan traditions, or was a uniquely Christian reinterpretation of natural bounty. Either way, the golden syrup leaves a lasting impression, both as a taste and as a symbol of life's sweet moments amid restraint. You dip your finger into a pot of honey, tasting its thick richness as it melts slowly on your tongue, offering a rare and quiet pleasure. It's the kind of sweetness that doesn't shout, but lingers a whisper of warmth in the monastery's chilly austerity. You watch as olives and olive oil enter the monastic culinary world like quiet treasures. Subtle but profound in their presence, these Mediterranean gifts, so integral to Roman life, have been embraced and carefully adapted by the monks. While meat and dairy are often off limits, olives and their oil provide a unique richness, a small luxury within the bounds of monastic austerity. Olives themselves are not eaten with abandon. They arrive cured, a process that takes patience and knowledge, soaking in brine, drying, and sometimes smoking to remove their natural bitterness. The monks understand the value of this slow alchemy, transforming a harsh fruit into something savory and sustaining. Each olive is small, wrinkled, and intensely flavored, a concentrated burst of earth and sun. Olive oil, however, holds a place of almost sacred importance. Monks either cultivate modest groves themselves or trade with nearby villages. Always mindful of the preciousness of this amber liquid, you watch as a small amount is poured from a clay cruet, its fruity aroma filling the cool, stone kitchen. The oil glistens when drizzled over barley cakes or lentil stew, softening the humble textures with a smooth silkiness. Its uses extend far beyond the table. Olive oil fuels the lamps that illuminate the monastery's long evenings, a quiet glow casting flickering shadows on the cold stone walls. It's also essential in anointing rituals, symbolizing purification, healing, and divine blessing. You imagine a monk pressing the warm oil onto the forehead of a novice, or blessing the refectory door, weaving the oil's practical and spiritual roles together, seamlessly. A quirky fact lingers in your mind. Some monks used olive oil as a hair treatment, mixing it with herbs like rosemary or lavender, not just for vanity, but for health. They believed it promoted vitality and kept their skin supple, despite harsh climates and hard labor. You chuckle softly, picturing a group of austere monks discreetly rubbing oil into their hair before prayer. Historians still argue whether olive oil's sacred uses grew directly from early Christian rituals or were adapted from older Mediterranean customs. Some suggest the oil's prominence in pagan festivals naturally transitioned into Christian symbolism, while others see the monks as innovators, imbuing olive oil with new meanings. The oil's smoothness transforms every simple bite into an almost indulgent experience. You drizzle a small amount on your barley bread, watching the crust absorb the gleam, like sunlight caught in glass. The taste is buttery, fruity, with a slight peppery finish, an elegant flourish on a humble meal. Olive oil becomes a metaphor here for the monastic life itself, modest, restrained, yet rich with layers of meaning and quiet luxury. Water, the simplest ingredient, yet utterly indispensable, flows quietly through the monastery's daily rhythms. You become aware of how deeply monks revere water, not just as a practical necessity, but as a symbol of purity, life, and spiritual renewal. The water in the monastery comes from nearby springs or wells, carefully tended and protected. You watch a brother lower a wooden bucket into a stone well, the rope creaking softly as it's drawn up, brimming with cool, clear water. The sound of water splashing into basins echoes faintly in the courtyard. A constant, soothing backdrop to monastic life. Drinking water isn't always straightforward here. The monks often flavor it with herbs mint, rosemary, or sage, to mask any slight bitterness or to add a refreshing twist. Occasionally, they dilute it with a bit of vinegar, creating a drink called posca, which serves to settle the stomach and invigorate the body during long fasting periods. You can imagine the sharp tang waking up tired senses after hours of silent prayer or manual labor. Water is also essential in food preparation. You see it being added to soups and stews, the lifeblood that softens grains and brings disparate ingredients together into nourishing meals. Even the barley cakes require just enough water to hold their form without becoming soggy. The balance is delicate and honed through generations of practice. A quirky tidbit surprises you. Some monasteries believed that water from specific springs possessed healing powers. They carried small flasks of this holy water on pilgrimages, or used it to bless the sick, blending the physical and spiritual properties of water into a powerful ritual. Historians still argue whether this sacred attitude toward water derives primarily from pagan rituals or Christian reinterpretations. Some see parallels with ancient purification rites, while others emphasize the new symbolism water gained through baptism and monastic asceticism. You find yourself appreciating how the monks' reverence for water mirrors their respect for all resources. Nothing is wasted. Everything is infused with meaning. Water is the thread weaving life and faith together. Quiet, but essential. You take a sip from your own cup, feeling the cool liquid trail down your throat. Refreshing and grounding. In this simple act, you glimpse the monastery's core humility, reverence, and a profound connection to the most basic elements. Fasting is a cornerstone of monastic life, threading through the calendar like a steady, solemn drumbeat. You observe how this practice, far from mere deprivation, is a discipline designed to refine both body and spirit, a ritual embracing humility, solidarity, and focus. The monks prepare for fasting days with care and intention. Meat and dairy vanish from the table, replaced by plain barley, legumes, and bitter greens foods that sustain without indulgence. Meals shrink in size and number, often limited to 1 or 2 small servings to cultivate detachment from physical cravings. In the refectory, the atmosphere shifts on fasting days. Monks eat in silence, the clink of bowls and the scrape of spoons more pronounced in the hush. You hear the faint murmur of prayers and chants, reinforcing the sacredness of this austerity. It's less about punishment and more about purification, a cleansing that extends beyond food to the mind and soul. Interestingly, the monks have developed special fasting recipes. Barley and lentils are often combined with wild herbs, vinegar, or a touch of olive oil to create simple but nourishing dishes. One such meal is a thin gruel, thickened slightly with barley flour and seasoned with herbs picked from the garden. It's designed to sustain without overwhelming, nourishing the body gently as the spirit sharpens. A quirky historical note piques your curiosity during fasting. Monks sometimes drank posca, a diluted vinegar drink, originally favored by Roman soldiers, believing it helped cleanse the digestive system and ward off fatigue. This connection between ancient Roman customs and monastic discipline fascinates you, showing how the past lingers quietly in the present. Historians still argue whether early Christian fasting practices were directly inherited from Jewish traditions or evolved uniquely within monastic communities. Some scholars suggest that fasting rituals adapted local customs, merging various influences into a distinctive spiritual discipline. You can't help but admire the monk's ability to find grace and even subtle joy in fasting. The ritual isn't just self-denial, it's a gateway to deeper awareness, empathy, and spiritual resilience. As you imagine joining a fasting meal, you feel a strange sense of peace settling over you, a quiet strength born from restraint and devotion. You settle into the hushed atmosphere of the monastery's refectory, where mealtime is a solemn ritual more than just an opportunity to eat. The room is simple, long wooden tables, rough-hewn benches, the faint flicker of candlelight casting dancing shadows on stone walls. There is no chatter here, only the quiet rhythm of eating, the scrape of wooden spoons against bowls, and the soft voice of a reader reciting scripture or stories of saints. You realize quickly that silence is not emptiness, but a vital part of the meal's spiritual texture. The monks eat slowly and deliberately, each bite savored with mindful attention. Their heads bowed, they practice a deep form of contemplation, turning the act of eating into a prayerful meditation. You notice how the absence of conversation focuses the senses. You become acutely aware of the texture of the barley bread, the earthy warmth of the lentil stew, the faint bitterness of wild herbs. Every flavor seems amplified, every mouthful rich with layers of meaning. This tradition of silent meals may seem austere, but it serves a profound purpose. The silence creates space for inward reflection, turning nourishment into a sacred dialogue between body and spirit. The reader's voice weaves through the stillness, offering stories of faith and humility that echo in the monks' hearts, as surely as the food nourishes their bodies. Interestingly, the practice of silent meals draws roots from Roman convivium, customs, banquets, where silence sometimes marked respect or solemnity, but the monks transform it into something uniquely spiritual. They have taken a social convention and repurposed it into a tool for cultivating humility and inner peace. Here's a quirky detail: breaking the silence during meals was considered a minor but serious offense in some monasteries. A monk who spoke out of turn might be gently reminded with a rebuke or assigned extra prayers. You imagine the slight tension that would add, turning each word into a careful choice. Every silence, a shared bond. Historians still argue whether the silence was primarily a disciplinary mechanism or a sincere spiritual practice cultivated by the monks. Perhaps it was both discipline and devotion, intertwined. Like the threads of a finely woven tapestry, you find yourself drawn into the rhythm of this quiet meal, feeling the stillness wrap around you like a soft cloak. It's a rare kind of intimacy, a shared journey inward that transcends words and fills the space with a gentle calm. As the seasons turn, so too does the monastery's menu shift in subtle but meaningful ways. You become keenly aware of the deep connection between the monks' food and the natural world, how their meals reflect the ebb and flow of the year's cycle. It's a humbling reminder that life, even one devoted to prayer and asceticism, is rooted in the rhythms of the earth. Spring arrives with fresh herbs and tender greens. You imagine walking through the monastery's garden, the soil still damp from rain, the air alive with the scent of new growth. Wild garlic, nettlers, dandelion leaves, these bitter, vibrant flavors awaken the palate after the long, sparse winter months. The monks harvest carefully, mindful not to overpick, respecting the garden's quiet generosity. Summer brings an abundance of fruit and vegetables, filling the larder with cherries, apples, figs, and squash. The monks prepare simple preserves, dried fruits, and pickled vegetables that will sustain them in harsher times. You can almost taste the sun-drenched sweetness of a fig, its flesh soft and honeyed. Autumn is the season of harvest, when grains are gathered and stored, barley and wheat, lentils and beans are carefully dried and shelved, transforming the refectory into a storehouse of sustenance. The monks celebrate the harvest quietly, with small feasts of nuts and wild greens, rituals that blend Christian Thanksgiving with echoes of older pagan customs. Winter demands heartier fare, thick stews, preserved legumes, and dense barley cakes. The food is simple, but rich, with the comfort of warmth and familiarity. The monks rely on their stores, eating mindfully to make provisions last until spring's renewal. A quirky tidbit: some monasteries maintain detailed calendars noting the best times to harvest certain herbs or foods, blending folk wisdom with religious observance. These calendars sometimes included prayers for favorable weather, revealing the monks' blend of practical knowledge and spiritual hope. Historians still argue whether the monastery's seasonal eating habits were shaped more by ancient Roman agricultural cycles or by Christian liturgical calendars. The answer is probably both. Entwined, like the vines growing along the cloister walls, you imagine the monks stepping out into the garden as each season shifts, their hands brushing dew-covered leaves, gathering the earth's quiet gifts with gratitude and restraint. This cyclical eating is more than survival. It's a practice of attunement, humility, and reverence. The seasons breathe through the monastery's food, reminding you that even the simplest meal carries the weight and wonder of time itself. You arrive at the final moments of this culinary journey through monastic life, where the simplest acts, breaking bread, sharing a bowl of lentil soup, reveal layers of meaning far beyond mere sustenance. The monk's diet, pared down to essentials and framed by ritual and restraint, invites a meditation on nourishment in its fullest sense, connection to the earth, to community, and to the divine. You think about the rituals that have shaped these meals, the measured portions, the silent reflections, the seasonal shifts, how every detail is woven into a fabric of spiritual discipline. The monastery's food is a language, a way to express humility, gratitude, and devotion. It's tempting to romanticize this austere life, to imagine monks in their robes, savoring barley cakes with quiet satisfaction. But beneath the surface lies discipline and sacrifice, daily choices to embrace simplicity, to renounce excess, and to find grace in restraint. You smile at a quirky historical note. You came across monks sometimes joked that their barley cakes were the original energy bars, though without the fancy packaging or protein claims. It's a reminder that even in the most serious of settings, a touch of humor persists. Historians still argue whether the monastic diet influenced wider medieval cuisine or remained a distinct spiritual practice. Some see monasteries as the custodians of culinary knowledge, preserving and transmitting ancient traditions. Others emphasize the unique ascetic context shaping these foodways. As you slowly close this chapter, you feel a gentle, calm settling over you, like the fading light of day slipping softly into night. You carry with you the echoes of stone walls, simmering stews, and whispered prayers, the quiet labor and devotion poured into each humble meal. The monastery's food becomes more than a story. It becomes a lens to understand a way of life that honors simplicity, disciplina, and the sacredness of everyday acts. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and the world softens, you can rest with the knowledge that even the simplest meal can be a prayer, a meditation, a quiet connection that nourishes far beyond the body.